So the first thing we're going to talk about is the grain of the fabric. When fabric comes off a bolt, however wide that bolt was, that's the crosswise direction. The way it was wrapped on the bolt is the lengthwise. So when you're buying yardage, you're getting 2, 3, 4, 5 yards, you'll notice that one direction is going to be longer. That's called the lengthwise grain. Fabric falls towards gravity. So even if I take this fabric and I try to do this and let go, you can see what happens. It's going to, the yarns are going to want to go to the ground. So the grain line, the lengthwise grain, is usually what we want to work with when we're making clothing. We want that lengthwise to be the direction of the garment in the lengthwise direction. It's going to matter later on, especially when you're into draping things or you're making a dress or something, that the grain line is super important. You're going to be learning how we place that grain line when we cut things out. So I want you to think about grain, and I want you to take your sample. Here I have a sample fabric that's 4 by 9, and you can see one side has a pretty strong color to it. The other side is more white. The same thing with, I have another colored fabric here, that the print on the surface is sort of a red color. The back is beige. So you'll be able to tell when you're sewing something, what's the right side of the fabric? This is the right, this is the wrong side. This is the lengthwise grain. This is the crosswise grain. When they're weaving fabrics, many times the yarns that are in that lengthwise direction are a stronger yarn. They have to withstand the weaving process while it's in the loom. So that sometimes that yarn might be tight or twisted. It might be a little finer. And then the filling yarns that go from side to side are more of a decorative yarn. So most of the time, you don't want to turn the fabric sideways. If you're working with a knit fabric and it has lycra in it, or you have denim that has lycra in it, if you cut out something that's on the sideways direction, your stretch is going to be stretching lengthwise instead of stretching across. And we want garments that stretch in that crosswise dimension. We don't need to elongate the fabric. We need to be able to move in it and have it stretch. So understanding grain line is pretty important. So you're going to make a little sample. Let me tilt my computer down here so that you can see the sample on the table. There we go. Let's see. Maybe it's better to do it on the brown one. So for straight grain, what you're going to do is you're going to draw a line down the fabric. This is my straight grain. Try to make sure that you're following the grain of the fabric. Your crosswise grain is crosswise. So you're going to run a line this way. And you're actually going to write on here that this is lengthwise grain. You're going to write on the other one that it's crosswise. And mark that sample so that you can see those two grain lines. Now, one of the things for a bias is to run something at what's called 45 degrees. So 45 degrees would be the true bias. Whenever you have a fabric and you go in the bias direction, let me open a piece of this so you can see it. So again, lengthwise, crosswise, bias is a 45 degree angle. And that's where you're going to find the most amount of stretch. Like, I really can't stretch this fabric going sideways. This a nice plain foundation weave. You can't stretch it this way. But if I go in this direction, I'm going to let it flap down. I got a 45 degree. See how much it stretches? That helps in garments like where your elbow would bend and different things. Sometimes you might want to make a dress or a skirt that's cut on the bias. And it will drape more. It will cling to the body more because the yarns are going this way to each other, and so they can actually move and stretch. So the bias, you want to be at 45 degrees to the selvage of your fabric. So some of your rulers will have a 45 degree line, the quilting ones. This particular ruler is see-through, and if I look at a 1-inch square, if I go from this corner to the opposite corner, that's a 45 degree going like this. So if I take my ruler, and I'm going to drop it down again so you can see it on the table. So 45 degrees, if I take my ruler and I lay the square so that the top of the square lines up with the line I've drawn lengthwise and the bottom, that's going to be 45 degrees. So if you draw a line along there, that's the bias. And so you want to mark that that's the bias. So basically, that's your first sample that you will put in your sample book. Oh, I can see on here that the words are backwards, so it's a mirror image. So just mark everything. It should be nice and clean for me to be able to see it. You'll take a photograph of this, like this and this, and you put it in your slides, and mark your slide that this is your Grainlines sample. That's the first one that's up on the very top of the list. So you'll be able to check off that you've done that one. You want to have another piece of fabric that has the selvage. It shows that selvage edge. On this fabric, it's a tight weave. There's no little fuzzies coming out. Depending on what kind of print you bought, you might have bought one that selvage is light. So I want you to cut another sample and mark that sample, pointing with an arrow that this is the selvage. It's a word you have to get used to, but it will be used a lot in clothing construction. So we want to start to know these vocabularies.